Well, good evening, and I'd like to call to order this planning meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores. Welcome everyone in the council chambers. Our first order of business is additions, deletions, or amendments, and we have nothing under that. The next is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and again, I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. None declared. Then we have the next item on the agenda is adoption of minutes. And it's been moved by Councillor Grace and seconded by Councillor Minaj that the Planning Committee minutes dated June 18, 2018 are hereby approved as circulated. Is there any errors or omissions or comments? All in favor? That's carried. The next item, we have one delegation this evening, and it's Katie Cranenberg, and I think her father is going to speak. Is that correct? Are you going to speak, Bob? Okay, if you just want to come up to the mic and welcome. I think we have some written documentation, and thank you for sending that in, Katie.
Well, for the first thing is, I'm not from Saugeen Shores. I am outside of Southampton now. I was a member of Saugeen Shores for quite a while. I just don't understand why there was no, what do you want to call it, information sent out unless you come here to this office. Now, I am a businessman. I run my own business. I have for 35 years. I just can't drop everything at the last moment to literally come and read what this council has put forth on a piece of paper. That's why at this last meeting I asked if I could have it mailed to me so that I could understand and literally have a chance to read it. And to this moment, other than talking to Mike, or sorry, excuse me, Dave, on the phone, I was told there was nothing going to be sent out. Now, right now, as of right now, I still don't know what even occurred or what even was asked for all these questions at the last council meeting about this severance.
So just to cover that, first of all, there would have been a notice sent to everybody within 200, what is, so everybody within, every property owner within 120 meters would have been mailed a notice, and I suspect that's what you got in the mail, was it, Katie? You got a notice to say that there was this application and this hearing would start. And so then the planning report is available. It's available online prior to the meeting on the Thursday prior to this meeting. And I'll try and answer your questions about the comments that you raised at the last meeting. They will be, and so we'll have a report that the planner will give us a report tonight. And in that report, she will try and address all of the concerns that were raised at the last meeting and see whether if there's ways of dealing with them or how they fit into her recommendation. So it's really a two-part process, Bob. The first...
I realize it is a two-part process. Don't get me wrong. But when things aren't dealt with from the first meeting and this meeting's already adjourned, what happens then?
This is the standard process that we use in Saugeen Shores, where we have a public meeting where we ask people for their comments, and that's what happened at the last meeting. And then the planners and our staff take those comments back and consider them and try and address them through the recommendation that you will hear tonight and the report that you'll hear tonight. Again, that will be available on the town's website if you would wish to see it at any time, and the county website, I should say, sorry, the Bruce County website. I know it's a complicated process. Land use planning is a complicated process, but it's the same process that we use throughout the province. Excuse me.
I realize. But normally in the region of Peel, which I am from, when you are asked to sign the documents outside, they mail you what decisions were made before the meeting.
Well, I think there has been no decision made on this particular application yet, so that's why you haven't been given a notice. Once there is a decision, that could happen tonight, and at our council, it'll be a recommendation, and then we'll go forward to council for a decision. Then everybody that asks for a decision, a copy of that decision, will be mailed that decision.
Okay, now what happens with these questions, like I said, that were asked last weekend, or the last meeting, about the width of this driveway, the whole 9 yards?
Well, again, I think you'll see that Tessa and our planning department, our staff, will make in the next report, which follows, will follow here very shortly, or you'll see how she tried to address all of those concerns in the recommendation.
And again, like I said, how can you literally be having another meeting with not having all of these questions asked from the last meeting?
Well, what I'm trying to say is those questions, you should have an answer for them tonight. You may not like some of the answers, but they should be answered tonight in this planning report. And like Tessa will present that very soon. Okay.
Now, because I'm not from here, I don't get a chance, because I am on a cell phone, I don't have half the time internet access. That's why I asked for this stuff to be mailed to me, because 90% of the time I'm in Tobermory, where there is no internet access or cell phone service.
Well, what we do, first of all, the planning report wouldn't have been finalized till sometime last week and put on the agenda, so it wouldn't have been Thursday. So, but you're entitled to at any time come into the town office and view it if you would like.
And again, that's my point. Everything is at the town office. This town office closes at 5 or 5:30 at night. I don't get home till 8, 9 o'clock at night.
I don't disagree that the process isn't perfect, and it perhaps could be better, but this is the process we have, Bob, and it's unfortunate that you're in this situation. Hopefully you'll be satisfied with the report tonight, and we can make a recommendation to council.
Well, hopefully there is some resolutions to this problem that's going on, and my questions were apparently sent in by Katie, because I was in Tobermory and there was no way I could get here in time. I had to leave work early to be here tonight to be able to speak on their behalf.
Appreciate that. The other thing, and I don't want to say, once we get a completed application from the property owner, we have an obligation to that person then to proceed with the application under a certain time period. So, I mean, we're in on one hand, we have to satisfy this side, and we have to try and satisfy that side in the compromise. And hopefully the compromise we see tonight will satisfy you.
Hopefully, like I say, that this compromise is going to be available to everybody.
Well, it is, and if you want, you can come into the town office to see it at any time, Bob.
No, but what I'm...
Yeah, and you'll get a copy of the decision, so you'll get a written copy of it.
I don't know if I'm saying the right words. I'm not a highly educated man. But hopefully this thing that is going on is going to be in benefit to everyone around.
Well, I think the whole committee would share that thought with you at any time, that anything we do here is a benefit to the people and the community.
I don't like to see young kids railroaded.
Well, I don't think anybody's railroading, and it's unfortunate that I didn't get enough information or didn't understand it. I know it's a complicated process.
Well, when you're
Okay. Okay, I appreciate that. Yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Just a thought as the speaker was speaking about with this situation and the circumstances with all the applicant, but the individuals affected. Could we entertain the idea? I'm just wondering if there was an opportunity for Tess or staff to have. Was there ever a sit down with the residents affected, just to kind of explain how the system works, try to so to make sense of it?
It would have been offered, Mike, at any time. We do that at any time. I suspect it would have been. I think Tessa was speaking to her, but if you would like to speak to her before the meeting, by all means, get a hold of. You could have got a hold of it. Okay. So the next item on the agenda then is this, it's a report, and it's the Saugeen Official Plan Amendment number 29-18.46 and zoning bylaw 23-18.48, Wycolt and Trelford and Kara Davison, 164 and 158 Albert Street, South Southampton. And I guess I will turn it over to Tessa.
Great, thank you. So we've got the property up there, and as you know, this is a property that we saw last month for information, and now we're here tonight to make a recommendation in regards to this application. So just to give a little bit of site context again, so this is a proposed development near the corner of Spence and Albert Street South. And basically the rear of both of these properties is proposed to be severed and to create 3 lots. So 1 lot coming off the rear of 158 Albert Street and 2 lots coming off the rear of 164 Albert Street. The current uses on the property are residential at 158, and there's a mix of residential and commercial uses at 164. There's municipal services available. These lots will continue to take access from Albert Street South, and the new lots are proposed to take access from Lee Lane. So just in terms of the purpose of the applications before us today, the purpose of the local official plan amendment is to change the land use designation for a portion of the 2 subject properties from highway commercial to residential to allow for this new development as shown on Schedule A. So as mentioned last month, the highway commercial designation does not allow for residential uses. The existing residential uses on the properties are considered legal non-conforming, and there's no issue bringing those, having those continue on the properties. But the new residential uses do require the OPA. So this is the area that's proposed to be redesignated in line with the property line to the north for the residential area. The zoning bylaw amendment is also proposed in conjunction with this. So there will now be 3 different zonings on the site, on the subject lands, as opposed to the 1 highway commercial zone currently. So this part of 164 is proposed to stay just highway commercial. 158 is proposed to be highway commercial special in order to reduce the existing reduced frontage on the property and the reduced lot area that will occur as a result of the proposed severance. And then these lots, we do propose that they be zoned R2. We have also prepared a bylaw that would have them be zoned R1 for the committee to consider as well. And so those are the rezoning proposed here. In terms of any kind of new any new comments received. So the town had provided some previous comments, and they've updated their comments as well. So as mentioned at the last meeting, the turnaround was deemed not necessary. And on July 9th, town staff did provide some additional comments in regards to services, reiterating the fact that existing services to properties will not be negatively impacted by this development. And just providing additional details in terms of the reconstruction of Lee Lane. It's proposed to include pavement, stormwater management works, and a sidewalk. No land acquisition is required. The town will work with the developer on timing and payment of the required works, and no issues have been raised by any other agencies. So just to respond to the public comments that were received at the last meeting. So we received a number of comments that had to do with issues including the impacts in nature of the improvements to Lee Lane, the impacts of roadworks and on services to adjacent lots, the potential for road widening, issues of snow removal, what the status of Lee Lane was, issues of notice, and the appropriate zone for the subject lands. So in regards to these issues, we do have a few comments that are outlined in the report. So both members of the public and of the committee raised some concerns regarding the nature of the improvements to Lee Lane. There was some confusion about whether a widening would be required at the last meeting. I think the improvement got conflated with widening, and we can confirm that there's no widening being proposed. All the work is being proposed in the existing municipal right-of-way. So it's a smaller right-of-way than typical municipal streets, but there's no land being sought from any of the landowners adjacent to Lee Lane. As per standard practice, the developer is responsible for ensuring that they operate within the limits of the Lee Lane road allowance. And again, as per standard practice, all features of private property that are not owned by the applicant will not be affected. And the town has, as mentioned, the town had those comments that they provided. There was a member of the public, as mentioned, who indicated that there were issues of snow removal on Lee Lane. And these, if there's continuing issues, it's important to work with town staff on these. New lots on Lee Lane shouldn't have any impact on snow removal on the property. The current practice is that the snow is pushed to the end of Lee Lane and then trucked, put into a truck and trucked out to be dumped on a nearby municipal property. So this doesn't change with the addition of these lots. That existing practice will continue. So in terms of Lee Lane, the addition of these lots doesn't have any issues or any additional impacts in terms of snow removal. The fact is that Lee Lane must be plowed and the snow removed, and that will continue to occur. One member of the committee asked for some additional background to be provided on Lee Lane in terms of the status. So just want to clarify that Lee Lane is considered a Class 1 municipal street in the Saugeen Shore zoning bylaw. As per the definition provided in the bylaw, Class 1 street is a road under the jurisdiction of the town for which the town provides year-round snow plowing and or garbage and recycling collection. So while Lee Lane might not be up to kind of a typical municipal standard in terms of width, it still remains a Class 1 street, and it's an appropriate site for development. And this development will, the improvement suggested will substantially improve the standard of Lee Lane from the existing dirt road that's there now. As mentioned, there was some issues raised in terms of notice. And so specifically, some felt that the notice was not adequate for certain members of our community. We're sorry that they felt our notice was not accessible to them. We are available to the public whenever they have questions. And the County Planning Department is undergoing a major communications review over the next year, and so this issue has been raised with those staff internally who are working on our communications, and we'll continue to explore what options might be available to us. There were some questions raised in terms of the zoning of the lots. So one member of the public had asked why the front property, 158 Lee Lane, was not also to be rezoned residential, seeing as it's just a residential use. We feel that the special highway commercial zoning is appropriate in this instance for that site. The existing residential use is permitted to continue indefinitely. However, the property does front onto a major thoroughfare with high visibility. So while the lot may be undersized for typical highway commercial uses, we don't feel it's appropriate to remove the potential for commercial uses on this portion of the property into the future. By passing the special zoning, we permit the widest possibility of uses on the property. Also, just to speak to our recommendation for the R2 zone, we feel that it's appropriate to zone the rear of these properties R2. Both zones are considered low density as per the Saugeen Shores official plan. The differences in scale, traffic character of the two zones between R1 and R2 we consider minimal. The zoning and adding the R2 zoning doesn't impact the ability of the developer to go forward with the 3 single detached dwellings as proposed. It just allows for more options into the future on the properties. It's my opinion that the Bruce County official plan does direct us to allow for semi-detached and duplex dwellings in areas where single detached dwellings exist. So as such, it's my opinion that we should allow the widest possible uses on the property, and that allowing that R2 zone is appropriate, also due to the proximity of the highway and downtown. So I don't think that that possible future additional density will have any major impacts as opposed to the R1's proposed R1 zoning. But as mentioned, we've prepared both bylaws, so it's up to the committee to choose which way they'd like to go on that. And then there was the delegation that was submitted to the town last week. I would just like to mention that planning staff left 2 messages with the delegation during the week of July 9th to attempt to discuss the issues raised. Our calls were not returned. Most of the issues that were raised in the delegation were previously discussed at the public meeting and have been addressed through this report. There were a couple issues that hadn't been raised that were brought up through the delegation. These included the installation of traffic lights at Highway 21 and Spence Street, how the plumbing for Lee Lane and the 3 new dwellings, and how the new lots would be surveyed. So we considered the installation of traffic lights at the corner of Highway 21 and Spence Street to be beyond the scope of this application. 3 new low-density lots should have a minimal impact on traffic and should not really impact any existing issues at the intersection. It hasn't. This is, as far as I know, not much of it. I don't know the existing issues there, but it hasn't been raised as somewhere that needs a traffic study. But it can be noted for future development in the area. Again, as per standard practice, the developer will be responsible for the extension of services to the new lots. The municipality will ensure that the services installed are adequate for the proposed use. And all new lots will be required to be surveyed by a qualified surveyor as part of the consent process. So with that, it is our recommendation that the applications be approved. So SOPA 29 be approved and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for consideration of adoption and then to the County of Bruce for approval. And that ZBA Z 2318-48 be approved with modifications as our recommendation, but again, that's up to the discretion of the committee, and that the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption.
Thank you, Tessa. So I'll read the recommendation. I guess what we should do is probably deal with the zoning on it and see where the committee wants to go, whether R1 or R2, and then I'll read it into the whole recommendation. No thoughts on this? Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Tessa. I guess around the zoning question, which way to go on the zoning, I guess my question is with regard to this comment that you've made in your zoning bylaw review section F of the report that said that should be noted that the Bruce County official plan directs that semi-detached and duplex dwellings shall be permitted in any zone where single detached dwellings are permitted. And I know you've had an exchange with some members of council on that subject over the course of the day. And I guess there's a matter of some interpretation on that point. And I guess it's like what that statement is a little bit earth-shattering, right? To say, because it goes well, the impact of it goes well beyond this particular report. It effectively says that anywhere, what your view is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that anywhere there is a single detached zoning in this municipality, a duplex or semi must be permitted in accordance with the Bruce County official plan. Am I interpreting what your statement there is correctly?
Yeah, so I do think I erred and I worded that a little bit too strongly. I just shouldn't have included the word any, because I think there is some level of interpretation there. It's my interpretation that the Bruce County official plan intends for anywhere where single detached dwellings to be allowed to allow for semis and duplex, that there's no difference in compatibility, but there is a level of interpretation. So I believe that's the intent of that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the R1 zone as it exists. So I think the language I used was a bit too strong in that, for sure, and it can be.
So would it be? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Mm-hmm. Would it be your view then, if we, based on what your statement was there, if we were to zone this property R1 and a single detached dwelling were constructed, that sometime in the future, under that R1 zoning, that somebody could just construct a single detached on these properties without changing the zoning? Not
currently, but I think what the OMB decision for Barry's Construction showed is that it can be contested, and that in that decision that there was some discussion in terms of what was it compatible, and does the Bruce County official plan intend to have these in the same area? And in that decision, it did favor to allow for semis and duplexes in areas where singles are detached, and that's why there's a level of interpretation there. So as of now, no, it's not allowed in the zoning. The zoning says only single detached, but I think, based on some of the previous decisions, I think there's kind of some room there to challenge that zoning.
No, I think we're kind of confusing it here. The Bruce County official plan, as all official plans, are general policy statements about where you get specific is the zoning bylaw. And if we zone this R1, then only the uses permitted in our zoning bylaw under R1 will be allowed, not the ones that are under R2. And if you want to make it R2, then you go through this process again.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Vice Deputy, were you around?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The applicant applied for R1. I haven't seen anything whereby they've changed their application, but I did want to ask if the circulation has gone out to the entire circulation area again that indicates now R2, because the first one would have said R1. So has another message gone out to the neighborhood saying R2?
No, there hasn't been an additional circulation.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to follow up on Deputy Mayor Charbonneau's question about, which was actually my question about, and I've talked to Tessa today. I would respectfully request if you could take that word any out of your report. I mean, if this report is being used as a precedent, which it might be, I think that word any is going, as you've admitted, going too far, and underlines that kind of interpretation. I would say with the case that you brought up as a precedent, the argument there, to my understanding, the strongest argument was the fact that it was not exclusively an R1. In a broad area, there were cottages, and there was an area zoned across the road that was an R4 apartment building. So it wasn't exclusively in R1. If we leave this language the way it is, it could be interpreted to be an exclusively R1 neighborhood. Suddenly, you're allowing semi-detached or duplexes. And I think that's, in my opinion, going way too far. So,
just for clarity, I hate to interrupt you. I think again, like the app, whatever the zone that we approve, that's what it'll be. I think the other one, if we're confusing things here, because what happened at Barry's was there was an application to do that, to do exactly what the board agreed with, because it was R1, and he couldn't do that. And so I think, so that the question, I think we've kind of confused it here. If we say it's R1 tonight or whenever, or R2, then only those uses that are listed in our bylaw will be permitted. So there's a clear distinction of the uses in the bylaw. Sorry for interrupting, Carol.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just asking if it's possible in terms of this report for that particular word to be removed from Tessa's report.
Yeah, I think we can do that for the minutes for the next meeting. Councilor Minaj.
I'll keep my first thought about entering into that discussion for the second part of this meeting. So I'd like to discuss 510 Market Street again and its application with LPAT and everything else. Thank you. But so I missed a couple of things here as well. Who's responsible for completing the works on the lane, the municipal works?
So it's like any kind of development proposal. So it'll be the developer who's responsible for the costs and the works to those lanes, but it'll be reviewed by municipal staff to whatever specification they require.
I just wanted to check that, and I also want to know if there is if there's any kind of prescribed timeline. Is there an expected timeline? Is it 5 years from now? Is it going to be done this fall? Do we have any understanding of that?
All I can tell you is that we have received the consent applications, so those have now been received by our office, and we're working on getting those started. So I imagine they'll be, but I don't know if they'll start the roadworks before those are completely processed or not, but I can tell you that they are moving forward with the consents at this stage already.
Mr. Mayor, I think there's an element. Can we put the drawing up that shows the one trapped property that has its own driveway on that? 150? No, 160, is it? 160? 150. So is there anything that can be entered into, some sort of additional agreement that says how they are going to deal with the whole laneway being dug up when that's their only access way to their property? Like, is there any special provision that we could think of and could add or could help them with? Something to think about. You don't have to answer that tonight, but that's something I would like to be concerned with. Is they are trapped. It'll be local, at some point it might be dug up and they may have to park on the street in the middle of winter is what I'm trying to get to. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was the opposite. So I don't know where the two new lot line, the two new lots are split. I don't remember seeing a drawing that showed where the lot line split is for the two new lots.
Well, that was because that's subject to the consent application and not the rezoning, and there hasn't been any proposed special provisions, so those lots will meet the zone for the R1, and if it's R2, they'll also meet it for the R2. Now that we've received the consent application, we'll start looking at exactly where they propose those lot lines. But one is just the rear of the existing 158, so it would just be kind of extending this lot line down, and that would be one right there. And I think it's more or less down the middle of the other lot.
Okay, so that brings me to my last point, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, and thank you, Tessa. Is that alignment, because it's a narrower lane road, maybe this could go to Amanda as well, is driveway alignment with not the full width of a road there. Is there some way we could prevent the driveways from being aligned on opposite sides? So lot 150 and the new lot driveways, it would probably not be appropriate for them to be completely aligned. That's my thinking. Is that a reasonable thought?
I don't think it's something to be concerned about because the number of trips a day. If you're thinking about the likelihood of a collision is unlikely.
Okay.
A lot of subdivisions driveways are right across, and sometimes it's worse because there's a parked car if you don't. So that one I wouldn't worry about.
Okay.
But I wanted to kind of take 2 seconds about the timing. We have to work that out with the developer as when the construction would happen. But as we see it, there'll be a couple options. Either they need to do it by the first building permit or have it done by the last building permit, or the last option will they'll give us cash and we'll do it when we are working on something in the area.
Okay, thank you. I've got one more for Amanda, but can I just follow up on that? So is there any opportunity to develop a way to get 150 out from the south to through some just an easement that we negotiate with the other landowner of that large chunk? Something to think about. But my last comment to Amanda to maybe speak to is when we do this roadworks, there's going to be some collateral damage, right? There's going to be some trees and some shrubs. There's some things that are not going to be the same anymore. So is the developer responsible for negotiating with the town or with the owners that if we take down a 100-year maple, that some kind of 20-year maple gets put back in a reasonable fashion, or are we just going to accept that that was a maple on the municipal property, so that's the end of the story?
This would be similar to any of our reconstructions, so we will try to do the best design possible with the least impact. So like on Lambert Lane, it's not in the center of the right-of-way to do those impacts, but where that impact happens, if somebody has private property within our road allowance, then it would get removed if needed, and it will be decided between the homeowner and the town if it's repurposed or replanted or renewed. So when it comes to trees, what we tend to do is we ask the homeowner if they want 2 new trees, if it was 2 trees removed, planted on their property. It still stays close to the property line, but it becomes on the private property. If it's a fence, it tends to get moved back to the property line and reinstalled. And all of that cost is borne by the developer. It might, yeah.
Any further questions? So I guess sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to your the specific point of the zoning, the applicant has requested R1 zoning. As far as I'm concerned, I'm content to go that far and no further in the case of this application. So if Mr. Mayor, if you're looking for direction on which of these options to pick, my preference would be the R1. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I suspect that's a consensus. Is there anybody that would not agree with that on the committee? Okay. Councillor Myatt.
Mr. Mayor, just again for the benefit of the residents who may be affected, and just in layman's terms, so could you just, to you, Mr. Mayor, Tessa, just a couple of paragraphs here. Are you going to remove my fence, hydro pole, or take the large tree? Could you just simple? Can you answer that for me?
Well, I can start.
I know it's covered off in the report somewhat, but can we just repeat it?
Well, I think I don't know where the fence is on this particular property. If it's on an encroachment into public property or not. If it's on the lot line or on private property, it won't be affected. In terms of hydro poles, they're owned by the utility, and the utility may move them as they see fit. And then the tree, again, it depends. I'm not sure if it's on private property or the public right-of-way, but if it's on private property, it won't be removed. If it's in the public right-of-way, as Amanda said, it may have to be moved.
So if a tree is removed, just so the neighbors are aware, that we're replaced with 1 or 2 trees, correct?
We do that. We would offer them that
Right.
choice. So if they don't like the tree, which has happened, we won't put a tree back.
Fine.
But if they want the tree, then we put it on their property, then they get to keep it. Okay. It's theirs.
And the question about where are you going to put the snow from Lee Lane? It's in the report. Just repeat it again. Where is the snow going to be put from Lee Lane?
So there's a few lanes that exist like this in Port Elgin and Southampton. What we do is we clear it with a loader. So it's not a plow truck that comes in.
Right.
So the loader will come in and take it away. And if you look on the north side of Spence, there's a municipal lane right there.
Right.
So that is where the snow will be stockpiled. And that lane, when that area gets filled, then a loader and a dump truck come, just like they do on High Street, and take away the snowbanks and take it to the snow.
Hope that helps a little bit, but anyways.
Vice Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Are we now able to just ask questions generally about the application? Okay. I'm curious to know, I have two things. A potential sidewalk doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I do love sidewalks. Is the idea that the sidewalk would be on the west side of the road so that the greatest impact would be borne by the three new properties? And if that's true, then has the property owner, or when would the property owner that is on that side right at Spence Street, when would they find out about that sidewalk?
So the sidewalk will be one of those cash and lieu for sidewalk, and we would only build the sidewalk when we can get Lee Lane to Adelaide Street.
Okay, my second question was, a lot of the mapping that I've seen of that area doesn't show Lee Lane going all the way through. Does the municipality own a right-of-way all the way across to Adelaide?
No, we do not. But if
Okay.
a development application came in for that property, it's something that engineering would ask for, so that Lee Lane could continue and have the access from 2 points.
So if I understand you, then a sidewalk would not be constructed right now. We would take cash and hold it for the eventual sidewalk should that need become available.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'll read the recommendation, and then it was just the understanding that this will be an R1 zone. That the local plan amendment S. Saugeen Shores Official Plan 29-18.48 for the properties described as town plot lots 25 and 26 East Albert Street, Town of Saugeen Shores, be approved and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for consideration of adoption in the county of Bruce for approval. And that zoning bylaw amendment Z 23-1848 for the same properties as described above be approved with modifications and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Is there any further discussion on this? All in favor then? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Or Jeremy, if you want to know anything about really what happened here, you can call Tessa or call our town office at any time, and we'll explain what's going to what we just did here tonight. So please feel free to, and if you want, we can give you those numbers. I think you probably have the number, do you, Katie? Okay. There is a planning report, a local planning appeal tribunal update, and Dan, are you going to enlighten us? Thank you.
Okay, good evening. So I'm here to give an overview of the Building Better Communities and Conserving Watersheds Act 2017. The most substantial thing to come out of this act is the establishment of the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, LPAT, which replaces the Ontario Municipal Board as of April 3rd, 2018 of this year. So as a result of Bill 139 and the establishment of the LPAT, there's some fairly transformative changes in terms of the land use planning and appeal system. The Ontario Municipal Board Act was replaced by the Local Planning Appeals Tribunal Act. In conjunction with this act, in conjunction with that act, the Local Planning Appeals Support Center was also established, which created a new agency to assist appellants through the process. And it also makes changes to the Planning Act and various other acts, such as the Conservation Authorities Act. The purpose of the act, and this wording is actually from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, is to carry out a check and balance function with respect to municipal planning decisions. The mandate of the LPAT has changed for specific appeals under the Planning Act, which I'll get into a little further into the presentation, but it remains unchanged for other appeals, which I'll also cover. So previously, the Ontario Municipal Board had a fairly broad mandate when it came to planning appeals. An appeal was filed, and that appeal would be a de novo appeal, meaning that when it got to the municipal board, that appeal started basically from scratch, and the OMB paid little deference to the municipal decision behind that appeal. Going forward, that changes, and there's specific rules for official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments that I'll get into here. There's basically specifically for OPAs and ZBAs, a two-phase appeal process. And I'll note that for other Planning Act applications, such as minor variances, this two-phase appeal process does not apply. The same grounds for appeal remain as before. They're just going through a different system, whereas before a minor variance would be appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board. Now it's going to the LPAT under the new rules of the LPAT, which I'll also get into a little further on in the presentation. So for basically the new test for an appeal of a municipally adopted or approved OPA or ZBA, the appellant must satisfy to the tribunal that part of the amendment of concern is meets one of these tests, is inconsistent with the PPS, fails to conform or conflicts with another official plan, provincial plan, such as the Niagara Escarpment Plan, or fails to conform to the applicable official plan. If the appellant does not satisfy this test, the LPAT is obligated to dismiss the appeal. For an appeal on a privately initiated OPA or ZBA, the appellant will have to explain how the existing policies or regulations of the OPA or zoning bylaw in place sought to be amended do not satisfy that previous test that I mentioned, and how the proposed OPA or ZBA does satisfy the new test. So this is specifically for private initiated OPAs and ZBAs that have been refused by council, by the municipality. So this is a little diagram, and I do apologize, it's hard to read. Again, this is from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, explaining the two-phase appeal process. So when an appeal is received, the LPAT will give notice that it's received. There's a mandatory case conference phase whereby the appeal, the appellant and municipality have an opportunity to find some common ground, I suppose, and if there's an opportunity for mediation, that route is sort of taken at that point. So that, again, going down here, if through that mandatory case conference phase, it's determined there's no opportunity for mediation, there's a hearing whereby the LPAT will determine if that test or the conformity consistency test has been met. And then, if so, the LPAT will make a decision. At this point, if the LPAT rules differ from the municipal decision, the LPAT will give guidance back to the municipality on where they felt the municipality erred in their decision and provide the municipality a second opportunity to review that decision. That decision is subject to another public notice and a 90-day time period. And within that decision, the appeal is open to, the initial appeal is then open to new appeals due to the fact that there is a public meeting component with the second hearing when it does go back to the municipality. So then the municipality is essentially given another opportunity to confirm their decision or change their decision. And if they confirm their decision and it goes back to the LPAT then has the opportunity to either uphold that decision or change it as they see fit. So in addition to that new two-phase appeal process, there's some additional time period changes for appeals, and I won't cover them all, but there's been a pretty concerted effort by the province or the LPAT in particular to expedite some of these appeals for, say, minor variances and so on, where they can get resolved quickly. So there are new time constraints where hopefully some of these appeals will be resolved fairly quickly. And as the bottom point notes, the time limits do not begin until the validity of the appeal has been determined by the LPAT. So it can be appealed to the LPAT, but those time periods noted above don't begin until that validity has been determined by the LPAT as a valid appeal. So as mentioned, I already covered the mandatory case conferences. It's an opportunity for the appellant and the municipality or the approval authority to find some common ground and hopefully to some extent head off an appeal to the greatest extent possible. And this is kind of an important slide too. There's a new rule book for the LPAT. So there's a lot of changes from a former OMB hearing to an LPAT hearing. Some of those changes are meant to speed up the process. So for instance, there's time limits on oral submissions. The process of cross-examination is eliminated under the LPAT. So a witness won't be cross-examined through the LPAT. And this one is also important too. The municipal record forms the basis of the evidence going forward to the LPAT. So there's very limited opportunities outside of, say, some caveats around plans of subdivisions where the updated information can be received. But for other Planning Act application, there's very limited opportunity for new evidence to be introduced outside of the municipal record. So the LPAT is very interested in seeing the record that committee or council based their decision on, and that will form the basis of the record. So that, to me, that says it's important to get the correct information at the onset of the process, because once it's appealed, there's no more opportunity for that for updated information to be brought forward to the LPAT. Also important too is a requirement for audio and video recordings of oral comments made at public sessions. So those, where available, I'll add that, where available, those audio and video recordings now must be submitted with the appeal record. Again, the LPAT is interested in seeing and hearing the basis behind a particular decision. And quickly, there's some other highlights that I won't cover in great detail because I'm not sure how these are going to play out at this point, recognizing there's been a change of government. But one of the forthcoming components of Bill 139 was a requirement that official plans be updated at some point in the future to include policies for climate change and affordable housing. The province was set to release guidance material on these amendments, and I have not heard anything at this point whether or not that's going to happen. There's also been amendments to the Conservation Authorities Act, which I noted at the beginning, and that's sort of beyond the scope of this presentation. Quite honestly, I'm not as familiar with the amendments to that act. The focus more so was on the LPAT for this discussion tonight. And that is my presentation on the LPAT.
Thank you, Dave. Questions? Secretary, Councilor Greaves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Daniel. My first question is about the comment in the chart, the flow chart, that says, and you mentioned this, no examination or cross-examination of witnesses. So to me that means no direct examination, where somebody's going to be asking them questions to tell their side, or cross-examination where somebody's challenging what they're saying. So that means that a witness just sits there and tells their story with no questions being asked at all?
Not exactly. The only, I guess, person or body that has an opportunity to ask questions is the LPAT tribunal member.
Okay.
So they sort of ask questions that they're interested in, but the other party or other parties to an appeal can no longer cross-examine a witness. It's just restricted to the LPAT board member, so where they have questions in their mind that they want answered.
Okay, so is this, just to be precise, is this flow chart, it comes from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs?
Correct, yep.
Okay, well, they should take out the word examination then. Because essentially what they're saying from what your explanation is that cross-examination is going to be eliminated.
Cross-examination
They are going
is...
to be examined by the tribunal.
Yes, I suppose that wording may be construed as incorrect, but yeah, there's that opportunity for the LPAT member to ask questions. Examine, I suppose, but yeah, that opportunity only exists for that board member.
Okay, thank you. My other question is about the new two-phase appeal process. And it says the appeals will need to demonstrate that the decision is inconsistent with the provincial policy statement or fails to conform to a provincial plan or applicable official plan. So that word applicable is pretty general. Does that mean county official plan or town official plan?
Yeah, I've seen it actually referenced as both, and it's a good question, as both the upper tier plan, so that test has to meet the upper tier plan, and other guidance material says the applicable official plan. So presumably a zoning bylaw, for instance, would have to meet the applicable local official plan, whereas a local official plan amendment would have to conform to the upper tier. So I know that probably doesn't provide clarity on your end, and it's a bit of an open question in my mind as well. I think there's going to be interest from the LPAT whether it conforms to an applicable official plan, whatever that applicable official plan is, whether it be the upper tier or lower tier, depending on the circumstances of the application, for instance.
Well, my question is relevant tonight because of the conflict that I think we see between the county plan talking about the zoning issue we discussed and what our zoning bylaw says. Mm-hmm. So in that case, I guess my question is there any guidance on which takes precedence?
I mean, I wouldn't want to sort of weigh in on the application as it may relate to tonight's application, as it may relate to an LPAT appeal. But in general, any planning decision, regardless, has to conform to that upper tier document. Any local decision has to conform to the upper tier document. Again, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there would be, in that conformity test, an examination as to whether or not it conforms to the upper tier.
Councilor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll work through this as quickly, as succinctly as I can. Just to be clear, I understand what you said is to be true, having sat here through 16 hours of OMB hearing, in particular 510 Market Street application. What you said earlier tonight was R1 zone cannot have a semi-detached home built in it, but an R1 zone can be changed. And That's exactly what Barry's construction did, was change the R1 zone to allow for the semi-detached home. This change, this OMB change, was born from a backlash and a protest of residential people against urban development developers, and they won their point. The government of the day said that the council shall make the decision whether developers are going to get their change or not. I do. My question is surrounding, in particular, the 510 Market Street OMB decision and the application of how our planners as staff work with council. So today, the planners give their advice as to what are the appropriate sections of the official plan, the provincial policy statement, the Bruce County official plan, the zoning bylaw. And then they give their opinion as to why we should approve or not approve a request. I believe this process is predicated upon staff not giving that opinion. Council has to make that decision. What we need staff to do is to draw our attention to the applicable sections of the plans and documents, and council has to make the decision. And the reason I'm asking that we confirm that this is my question, that we would confirm that we can in fact enact that process, is because when we got to the OMB hearing, the planner that was the tribunal for the OMB spoke to staff and said, and spoke to the appeal process and said, your planner said it was the right thing to do. And we had said it wasn't the right thing to do, which is exactly why they wanted to change this process. So we need, and I'm asking you, Mr. Mayor, we need to verify that we can ask our planning staff not to say whether they approve or disapprove of a request, but that they simply draw our attention to the applicable paragraphs of the documents and let us decide, and they would fall in line with our decision. If we approve it, then our planning authorities would support that approval. That's what this process is expecting.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask your opinion. It seemed like there were a lot of different times in there now, depending upon the type of request it was or appeal. Do you think that this sets up, I don't believe the time to initially submit something has changed, though, has it? Isn't there still a 30 days or something there?
Correct. The appeal period remains 20 days.
20 days, okay. Yeah. So do you think, though, when you say that the other time limits don't start until the validity has been determined, I guess we don't have enough experience yet to know just how quickly they're going to do that. I was just curious as to whether you thought this could be used as a stalling or delaying tactic, because it seems to set up, a different sort of flow, but yeah. I guess there's not enough information yet to say.
Yeah, I mean, it is a fairly new system, and I'm sure some people will find opportunities to use that system to their advantage, as it may be. I do know, and Jay will speak to after this on the agenda, we do have 2 current appeals, so there's a bit of a sense in terms of timeline, at least on one of them, how long it takes from the LPAT to determine that validity, I suppose. But again, that's for minor variants, so this sort of 2-phase test doesn't really apply in terms of the validity. They just, again, for the variances, they accept them as they did before. It's just under the umbrella of the LPAT now. Yeah. I guess I didn't want to steal Jay's thunder, but yeah. Fair enough. So one of them is for what's the address? 553 Hilker. And we actually just received the notice today of when the hearing is. It is in. If Tessa maybe could.
Yeah, so we submitted the appeal package about two or maximum 3 weeks ago to the LPAT, and the hearing's been scheduled for September 5th. So it's been a pretty quick turnaround, I would say. And we had 2 weeks to submit the package, and we needed those 2 weeks. So it was basically mid-June. The package the appeal was submitted to us. It took us about 2 weeks to put together all the documents for the LPAT, which it takes us minimum a week because we have to wait for the it takes us probably minimum a week just because we have to get the minutes, and we have to wait for you guys to approve the minutes before we can send those in. And then so it took us 2 weeks, and then so that was end of June, I would say, and now we're mid-July, and the date's been set, so it's been a pretty quick turnaround. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the validity sort of test really only applies to OPA and ZBAs, non-minor variances, yeah. So there's no real, I guess, sense of the timeline at this point because it is such a new system.
It's in person here, but it's a 1 day. They're scheduled 1 day and in person here at the Inside and Shores. Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau, then we'll go over here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for that update on that. I think that's it's good information, and I'm optimistic about this new system. I think it's a positive step to get a little bit more influence for the local view into the process. So I think it's good. I guess my only question is with regard to that, with the flow chart and the last question, last point, where in the event that it's returned to the local council by the LPAT for a review, what happens? Is there any indication from the LPAT or in the legislation? What happens if the local council takes no action, doesn't do anything? What happens then?
Yeah, so that 90-day time period in which they have to make another decision or confirm their original decision would expire, and at that point there'd be a no decision on that, and it would go back to the LPAT to make a decision. Yep, back to the LPAT.
Councillor Dave Mayette, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Chairman. My question, and if I've failed to read it somewhere in the notes provided, then excuse me. But so we have an LPAT, a couple of cases going before LPAT shortly. We're going to hear about them next, and so we have a committee that has been struck. The tribunal has been struck. Can you just explain to me who's on it, where it got struck, where do they sit? Yep. Is it open to the public? Is it those types of things, the mechanics of it?
Yeah, sure. So the former OMB board members, they're basically now LPAT members. So those board members are the same people. They, in many cases, are still dealing with legacy OMB cases. So there's a bit of a carryover. Some files are under the old system based on the transition rules, but the people are essentially the same. They sit sort of wherever they live or reside, I suppose, just as they did under the OMB. So there's no sort of local LPAT representative for this area. I think there is an effort to match tribunal members with sort of an area they're familiar with, whereas they also did that, I guess, to some extent with the OMB. But that's generally who makes up the board. There's, as I mentioned, there's a separate agency, the Local Planning Support Center, that's an independent agency from the LPAT. that body assists appellants, I suppose, the non-developers and so on who don't have access to high-priced lawyers and so on with the appeals process, as it can be complicated to navigate. But the hearings are dealt with, like this one, in the council chamber. There is expanded opportunities to deal with them through the use of technology, through like webinars and so on. But that's generally the makeup and sort of the rule structure.
To follow up, so really the term local is a bit of a misnomer. But and is there, I can understand like for this transition period where there are cases and we don't have people who are qualified to sit on a local tribunal, that there would be board members would assume those roles because they're the ones that envisioned this new process. I presume they had input in. But do you see a point in the future where we would have like a Bruce County local tribunal made up of people who are appointed by, say, the county council, that sort of thing?
I believe the Planning Act does afford approval authorities to establish their own appeals tribunal to some extent. Like Toronto, for instance, has its own appeals tribunal. They're the only example, though, in Ontario where a municipality has undertaken that process under their own guise. But I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything from the LPAT on whether or not they plan to sort of establish local bodies. I think the term local refers more to the decision-making aspect rather than the physical location of the tribunal members.
In this council or Aaron Eldersley council chambers, but I would have thought that the idea of the local would be that it would be the local people once removed from the people that made the decision.
The members, if I might, the members are still going to be appointed by order in council by the provincial government. So,
okay,
correct. Yep.
The same way the Ontario Municipal Board is. Okay, Councillor Grace.
Mayor, so just a question on the hearing on September 5th. Will that be here?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And do you know the time?
I believe it's 10:30.
And will we routinely get notices of tribunal hearings so that we can attend if we want to?
I mean, it's been sent to the clerk, so I don't know what
It'll
your
be on your agenda for a council prior to that.
Okay. My other question is just to confirm again. So it looks like essentially what happens here, we make a decision. If it's appealed, it goes to the LPAT. Ultimately, they're going to be making their decision based on whether our decision confirms to the PPS or the upper tier official plan. And if it doesn't, then they will send it back down to us and say, you better look at this again and reconsider. Mm-hmm. And if you don't reconsider right, then we will overrule you and you'll lose and you will come out on the losing end of the appeal. So I'm not sure that, in my mind, I don't see how that gives local councils a lot of say.
I think the procedures are much different than the OMB. Like they're not de novo, so the plan. So I think it's going to be very important that you get very comprehensive planning reports that interpret your current documents, because that is the only evidence that they're going to make their decision based on, is with the same information that council got. You're not going to be bringing up all kinds of new information after the hearing. So I think it's really important then that our professional planning staff come to us with the best interpretation of all of those documents. Councillor Minaj.
Two things. Can we confirm in this process then that lawyers are no longer part of this, or they continue to be part of this?
I can't confirm that, but I suspect they'll continue to play a part in it.
Because it's a very legal, the OMB was a very legal process. The other question is, we sit in deference to the Bruce County official plan as we speak. and we also don't support some of the things that are in the Bruce County official plan. And yet we're hearing repeatedly that the upper tier plan, we have to conform, and it, basically speaking, we can go into more detail, but in generalities, we need to conform to the Bruce County plan. Can we talk about, at some point on this council, some way to position ourselves so that we can appeal at the next Bruce County official plan process the changes that we need them to think about that would bring us in alignment with them or them in alignment with us?
I think there's been some confusion here. First of all, the general concept always is, and these documents are developed through many public meetings, many circulations to our staff and our councils when they're developed, and so that the concept is that our lower tier plans must conform to the upper tier plans. When they're passed, you assume that's what happened. You assume that they conform, unless you find something very specific. And I think, like I'm going to say that you couldn't go through it and nitpick somewhere and say that isn't right or that isn't right. But generally, and again, official plans are general policy statements. They are not like a zoning bylaw where they're very, very specific. They give you general direction about what you should go. And it's the same as the statement that your official plan must conform to the provincial policy statement. It's the same thing. And it must be read. So, when Bruce County will be updating their official plan beginning in 2019, and this community will have every opportunity it wishes to participate in that process and have input to the final document, as they did with the last document.
One of the 75 findings of the OMB hearing on the 510 Market Street appeal process was that our plan did not conform with the Bruce County plan on a very, very specific item that Richard Devereaux brought forward, and it did damage. Okay,
any further questions? Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on the comment about the level to which local input has an impact in this new process. And one important thing that I take from this is that because the entire record of the municipal conversation that takes place, the meetings, is going to go forward even through video and possibly audio recordings to the LPAT, that the arguments made not only by our professional planning staff, but by us, by the local representatives, will all go before the LPAT, and the LPAT will then consider. So in a case where perhaps there is a disagreement or a different interpretation, perhaps presented by elected people, then that interpretation will be heard by the LPAT, and the LPAT will be able to consider it and its validity. And so I think that that's a very powerful thing that was not true under the OMB, and has the potential to make a difference. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, and also the arguments made by the applicant will be just as powerful as the arguments that are made by council. So we've had a good discussion on that, and we look forward to this first hearing here in Sauget. It's unfortunate that we have a hearing. I have to say that, because hearings are not always the best way to resolve these issues. So I'll go back to the main agenda then, and the next item then is information report on planning appeals. Imagine that.
And I don't plan on saying anything unless there are questions from committee. So.
Thank you, Jay. I'm just kidding, though. Is there any questions on any of these two applications? As Linda said, they will be noticed on our agenda of when the hearing is scheduled, so you'll have an opportunity to come in and observe if you wish. Nothing further then. I have a motion that's moved by Councillor Madison, second by Councillor Mike Matt, that this Planning Committee meeting of July 16, 2018 hereby adjourned at 7:48 p.m. All in favor? We're adjourned.